With any luck, you'll be too late.
Right, get the ambulance in, pronto. We need CPR.
Oh, don't. No, please don't.
Yeah, we need the
I should
ambulance
have
in.
stabbed him a bit more.
We've got CPR.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time you're watching this. Today we will be talking about Penelope Jackson. It's also known by the Bubble and Squeak murder and the Pyjama Killer. This case I had absolutely no idea about. I find it so interesting because I stumbled across this case. I had absolutely no idea about it. I was watching memes one night on YouTube, and one of the memes was of the aftermath of this murder, which seems like a really weird thing to make a meme out of. But Penelope's reaction to what had happened made itself a meme. When I found this, I immediately was like, I need to know more. I need to understand what has happened here, because this just all seems really out of context and out of place and fascinating all the same. This case wasn't too widely represented in the news, and therefore there isn't as much content and background as I'd like to go into, but I've done my best, and we're going to talk about the case of Penelope Jackson today, the Pyjama Killer, or the Bubble and Squeak murder as it's better known. In this case, I will be using the full names of those involved, but for Lieutenant Colonel David Jackson, I will be referring to him as David Jackson. I don't want to take away his title at all, because obviously it takes years and training and a lot of work to become a lieutenant colonel, but just for the ease of this case, and because I do find lieutenant colonel quite hard to say, I will be referring to him as David Jackson. I refer to Alan Warrender as Mr. Alan Warrender or Warrender, so I just hope that that's not going to be taken too formally. I don't know anyone in this case. Again, it's for the sake of ease that I would call him Alan or Mr. Warrender. I also refer to Penelope sometimes as Penny, because that is how she was better known by her family and friends. I hope that this doesn't come across that I'm being disrespectful or too informal by lessening the names down to nicknames or lessening the titles down to no titles at all. It's just for the ease of this case and getting the information across. Penelope was born in 1954, which made her 66 years of age at the time of the incident. Penelope Jackson worked in the RAF as an administrator. There isn't too much about Penelope's background and history. It doesn't seem to flag up too much on various websites that I looked at, various videos that I looked at, but I will tell you as much as I could find out. Due to there being a lack of information found as well, there's a lot of speculation about people involved in this case. There's a lot of family and friend reports as opposed to hard facts. I have tried to steer away from them as best I can, but in telling this story, there is a few incidents in which I get the information from people that knew these people, as opposed to information found in court, etc. Penelope was married a total of 3 times before her marriage to David Jackson. I couldn't find any information about her first marriage, but I did find that her second marriage was to a man called Tony Rothwell, and he was an MOD employee. This marriage ended in the late 1980s. Penelope had met a man called Alan Warrender in the early 80s. They had met at RAF St Athan in the Vale of Glamorgan, where Mr. Warrender had been working in the RAF as a chief engineer. At this time, Mr. Warrender was married to a lady called Beverly. He had 2 daughters with her and an adopted son. Unfortunately, Alan and Penelope would have an affair, and Beverly would find this out. To add to Beverly's misery, she was suffering from breast cancer, and she would eventually pass away from breast cancer at the age of 36. In 1988, Mr. Warrender and Penelope would get married, and they would have a daughter called Isabel. During the marriage, Alan would fall on very hard times financially, and he would struggle to make ends meet. It was so bad that Alan was forced to go and speak to Beverly's parents about financial support. It was really hard for Alan to find a job, but he did end up finding one. However, its location was based in Saudi Arabia. It is said that Penelope instigated that both of Alan's daughters would go to boarding school. It is also said that when Alan was working in the Middle East, Penelope put 2 of Alan's healthy dogs down. To make matters worse, when Alan was working away, Penelope was up to her old tricks again. Whilst Mr. Warrender was away, Penelope did have an affair with Lieutenant Colonel David Jackson. When Alan returned, he did find out about the affair, and unfortunately, he decided to take his own life. Alan committed suicide in 1993. When questioned about this, Mr. Warrender's family all believe that his suicide was directly linked to Penelope and her affair. There is other speculation that the suicide was to do with his financial difficulties. In my opinion, I take the view that it was a combination of both. I think the financial struggles were deeply impactful onto Alan, but of course if your wife is having an affair, that's going to do nothing for your mental health. I think that also becomes the cherry on top of a bad situation. It was like the final straw for him. He was already suffering with money and he was already suffering with the loss of his ex-wife, and then to find out that Penelope has had an affair, I think it just was too much for Alan to take, and it was a combination of everything. So now we move on to David Jackson, and from the affair, David Jackson and Penelope get married. They became married in 1996. This would be Penelope's fourth husband and David's third wife. David decided to adopt Isabel, which was Penelope's daughter, with Alan. The couple had been living in Germany and France, but they then decided to settle down completely in Somerset, UK. All of David and Penelope's friends say that their relationship was very loving and happy and a good relationship overall. However, Penelope said that in 1996, David was incredibly violent. He was so violent that one night he took an axe to their living room furniture. Because of this incident, Penelope wanted to hide her former husband's love letters and memoirs. She was absolutely terrified that David would destroy these if he had found them. Penelope revealed that in 1998, physical violence from David started. Incredibly sadly, at the same time, David's son from a former marriage decided to take his own life. It was said that because of this, David was never the same. I'm going to directly read this part just because I don't want to get the words wrong, but Penelope in 2018 had sent David a text that said, "You frighten me. I cannot grow old like this." Another message from the same year read, "I love you, but I can no longer cope." In 2020, the police were called to the couple's home about an argument over a TV remote. In this incident, Penelope had actually locked David in the conservatory in hope that he would calm down. The argument was incredibly heated and Penelope was truly fearful, but David did not like being contained, and so much so that he found a fire poker and decided to smash back into the house with it. Penelope said that in this instance, she believes that it was due to the behavioural changes since an operation to replace the battery in David's brain implant. David had had this implant to reduce the shaking in his hands and his limbs. The police officer wrote down this incident as an assault, and he recommended to the couple that they do not stay together that night. On a wellness call a few days later, Penelope told the police that everything was back to normal. The battery in David's implant had been turned down, and he could not recall the incident or smashing through the conservatory. So now we find ourselves at the very next historical date, which is the 13th of February 2021, and this is the date of the incident in this case. Isabel had bought her mother a birthday present of a gourmet meal. The couple wanted to enjoy this meal with Isabel and her partner, so they decided to do a Zoom call, Zoom being a video calling app. It was still lockdown at this time in the UK, and this was the only way that the four of them could have this meal together. It is uncertain as to why, but the evening soured when David was very, very upset that Penelope had made a side of bubble and squeak to go with their meal. I don't know if bubble and squeak is a British thing. I really believe it is. So basically it's potatoes and cabbage and they're mixed together and fried. It is not something that has ever appealed to me. I have never had it. I have seen it. I have cooked it. But I don't like cabbage at the best of times, and the idea of this being like a potato patty with cabbage in it and fried up, I'm sure it's lovely. I don't want to try it. So after the bubble and squeak incident, things did seem to die down from that argument. However, a little bit later, another argument ensued. This argument was about who had charged the computer. I believe it was an iPad and the battery was dying, which means that the Zoom call was going to end, and they were both really going for one another in terms of who to blame for not charging the iPad. I find personally that both of these arguments, the side dish and the computer, are both small things to get annoyed and upset over. So upset that you have a full-blown argument about it. But there is definitely more under the surface to this relationship. So the meal ended, the Zoom call ended, and Isabel was in full belief that the argument had ended too. However, Penelope does reveal that once the Zoom call ended, things only escalated from here on out. Things had escalated so badly that apparently Penelope took a kitchen knife to bed with her and popped it under her pillow just in case she needed it for protection. Once Penelope had gone to bed, she realised the argument wasn't over. She still had feelings that she wanted to tell David about. So she went to their spare bedroom to find David. When she found David, she said to him, "I'm going to kill myself." He replied, "Well, get on with it then." Penelope then had an awful thought. She thought, "Why should it be me? It's you." Penelope decided that she wanted to get an apology from David. She returned to David after walking away from him, but he just responded that she was pathetic. So she didn't get her apology, she was just told that she was pathetic. The only people involved in this case are David and Penelope. They are the only two people that know the true events of that night. That is what Penelope told the police, so that is what I have put into this research. Penelope then said that after David called her pathetic, he then goaded at her to stab him. And in that moment, she snapped. She said that her thoughts were, "I just thought, I cannot do this, it's not fair," and I lost control. And in that moment, Penelope slashed David across the chest with the knife. Penny then walked downstairs to write a confession note, believing that she had just killed David. She mentions that, quote, "She has taken so much abuse and that she will accept her punishment, may he rot in hell." So whilst Penelope is writing this confession note, David had actually phoned 999. Some point in this call, David says to Penelope, "You couldn't even do the stabbing right." This was unfortunately the demise of David, because it was in this moment that Penelope saw red and stabbed him. To make sure that she actually killed David this time, she stabbed him again. It is later found in the autopsy that both of these wounds were fatal.
And are you with him now?
Well, I might just go and stab him again, but...
Alright, do not stab him again.
Why?
Okay, so just listen to my voice. Okay?
Yes.
Stay on the line with me.
I am complimented.
Okay, are you with the patient now?
Well, I'm in the lounge and he's in the kitchen bleeding to death with any luck.
To help him, okay?
No, I'm not.
Alright, madam.
I don't...
How many times have you stabbed him?
I did the once.
You did the once?
And then he said I wouldn't do it again, so I did it twice more.
So, okay. So in total, how many times?
3 times.
3 times, okay.
Once I thought I'd get his heart. Well, he hasn't got one.
So you can hear from the phone call to the emergency services that Penny did not want to help David at all. She has absolutely no want to try and save David's life. The entire call is about 18 minutes long, and most people believe that David was dead early on in this call. When the police turn up at Penelope and David's home, it is shown that Penny isn't worried about David at all. In fact, she's more worried about finding her coat. She also said to the officers, "With any luck, it will be too late." It just shows that she's fully content with her actions, and she really is hoping that David is dead. She's also heard saying, "I thought I got him in the heart, but he hasn't got one."
Hey madam, do you want to just step outside for me a minute? Can you come outside?
Yes.
Thank you.
He's on the kitchen floor.
Okay, at this moment in time, okay, if you just listen to my colleague, under arrest suspicion of attempt murder, mate.
Under arrest with suspicion of step murder. You do not have to say anything. It may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned anything you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence.
Might go in and see what they do.
Yeah.
Could I get my coat?
Just bear with me 2 seconds.
In there. I admit it all.
Alright.
Just get them. Alright, I want to go in. Alright.
No,
So-
he's on the kitchen floor.
Can someone just stay with Devon while I go in?
There's nothing nasty, and I'm certainly not. My coat's in the.
Yeah, just
Ouch,
wait
it's
2
a bit
seconds.
hot.
Alright, you okay? You alright?
With any luck, you'll be too late.
Alright.
What's your name, my love?
Well, I'm called Penny, but Penelope Jackson.
Do you live here?
You do live here?
Yes. Can I get my coat?
We'll get you a
Right,
coat.
get the ambulance in, pronto. We need
Oh,
CPR.
don't. No, please don't.
Yeah, we
Oh,
need
I
the
should
ambulance
have
in to
stabbed
do
him a bit
CPR.
more.
We've got CPR being done at the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Penelope, come with me, mate.
Do you want my keys?
October 2021, Penelope pleads guilty to manslaughter, but not murder. She also gave testimony that David had been violent during lockdown and the entirety of their marriage. Penny said that the violence in lockdown was the worst, as she could not escape him. Isabel, David and Penelope's daughter, also gave testimony in court of 3 instances where she had seen David be violent. When the family were living on a military base in Germany, David had walked up to Isabel and asked her to find the gift that she had got for Penny for Mother's Day. It was a mug filled with chocolates, and once Isabel had found it, David picked it up and smashed it. On another occasion, Isabel recalls coming home from school and seeing Penelope pushed up against the wall with a bloodied nose. Penelope then packed 2 suitcases, and she and Isabel went to stay in a hotel for the night. However, early morning, Penelope tells Isabel that they're going back home. On the final occasion, Isabel sees David holding a knife to Penelope's throat. It took 3 guests who were staying with them at the time to pull David off of Penelope. The defence lawyer said that her trial had become the subject of mockery and mimicry, which impeded her right to a fair trial. There was a lot of dark humour surrounding the trial, as videos had been released midway through to the public. When the evidence was released, the jury could then see more than the defence that Penelope was giving, which the legal team scrutinised as not a fair trial. It took the jury 11 hours to deliver a 10-2 majority verdict. The judge described the killing as a vindictive and cruel act, and he said he had no doubt that the first strike to Mr. Jackson was aiming for his heart. The judge ruled this as a premeditated murder, and Mrs. Jackson was sentenced to the minimum term of 18 years in prison. Isabel said that she felt the entire world fall from beneath her feet, because in that moment she hadn't just lost her dad, she had lost her mum as well. Isabel also says that since the incident, she still loves her mum, but their relationship will never be the same. Since the verdict, there has been an outcry that Penelope's sentencing was unjust, as she has suffered coercive control for the entirety of her relationship with David. Some of the public are hoping that Penelope's sentence can be appealed for diminished responsibility under a 2015 Act passed by UK government for coercive control. So that is the case of Penelope Jackson. I find it truly interesting because I found this due to a meme, which is what I believe was referred to in court. When police went to arrest Penelope, her reaction was so unusual, and people actually found it funny. They found that her coldness to the situation was so funny. The fact that she said he hadn't got a heart, the fact that she was after her coat, the fact that she didn't care and wanted to do it again. I just found it completely fascinating, and I needed to immediately understand what happened and know more about this case. Again, and as always, my heart goes out to those people that were affected by the events of today's case. My heart goes out to Isabel and all the other children that were affected by this. My thoughts go to the loved ones and the friends, as always in a murder case there are people left behind still suffering. So this case was really short, but there isn't a lot of documentation about the background of the people involved in this. I'm unsure that because this case was only 2021, if information hasn't come out yet, but I really wanted to cover it because I just found it so interesting. I would be really interested to, in a few years' time, when this case develops, to go back and find out more information about how this case progressed. So if you made it to the end, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you watching this with me. I really find these cases fascinating and I would love to do more of these. So that's all from me today. Thank you so much for joining me and bye bye for now.